gotcha.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission regular meeting. So we will start with the normal course of business and call the meeting to order. And are we in compliance with the open meeting law?
Yes, you are.
Okay, can I ask the clerk to please call the roll of the board members?
Chair White? Excused. Vice Chair Schultz?
Present.
Commissioner Sherman? Excused. Commissioner McCurdy? Excused. Commissioner Armenian? Excused. Commissioner Becker?
Here.
Commissioner DeBrey?
Here.
Commissioner Niger? Excused. Commissioner Henley?
Here.
Commissioner Lozano?
Here.
Commissioner Breyer?
Here.
Breer, sorry. Commissioner Aslan?
Here.
Commissioner Howard? Excused. Commissioner Fennell?
Here.
Commissioner Jimenez?
Here.
Thank you.
Then we're ready to go. So thank you for taking the roll. Walk up the stairs and take the elevator down. This is Chairman White. I'd like to introduce our newest member. Is it Jesus Jimenez? Or
Yes, sir.
okay, Jesus Jimenez, Ward 3. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself, or?
I'm Jesus Jimenez. I live in the area of Nellis in Washington. I work that area too with Las Vegas Metro. I've been a police officer for 11 years and in that area for 8 years.
Well, thank
So,
you.
good to be
and-
here.
Thank you and welcome. We hope that your voice represents Ward 3 strongly, independently, however that represents it. And we'll move on to we'll move on to, the announcement has already been made for compliance. Number 3. So we'll move to public comments. Public comments during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. If you wish to be heard, come forward to give your name for the record. The amount of discussion as well as any amount of time any single speaker is allowed may be limited. Is there anyone here for the public comment portion of the agenda? Hearing no one, we'll move on to item number 4 for possible action to approve the final minutes by reference of the regular meeting of March 5th, 2019.
Commissioner Becker, Ward 2, so moved.
Has been moved
I'll second it.
and seconded.
Henley, too.
Henley is seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. With that, we'll move on to item number 5, the report by the Department of Public Safety regarding issues at the city facilities and parks, all wards.
How's everybody doing today?
Doing well.
Officer Burdette, City of Las Vegas Marshals. We've seen an uptick recently in calls for service and arrests. We've also seen an uptick in people lodging without consent of owner in the parks or just basically on any city property. The weather's getting a lot nicer, so a lot more people are coming out, staying in the parks later than they should, and as a result, we've seen an upswing in contacts on that. As far as Ward 1's concerned, it was a relatively low volume month, only a couple drug paraphernalias, nothing in Ward 2 as far as arrests or a few citations. Ward 3 was pretty active with 36 arrests, mostly relating to narcotics related offenses, one lewd behavior. Ward 4, only 3 arrests. Ward 5 was pretty active with 25, and Ward 6 with 1. As far as Ward 1 is concerned, on my patrols at night, I made contact with a gentleman who said he was having some issues in the park, and we've, as a unit, been trying to address them as far as people walking their dogs off leashes. Spoke to animal control about it, and we're gonna try to make more contacts out there and enforce that a little better. But he was complaining about the pedestrian gate along the south wall. I don't know if everybody's very familiar with the park. There's an apartment complex back there, and then there's a wall with a pedestrian gate that goes between the apartment complex and the park. He was complaining the problems coming from there. I referred him to his councilwoman, and I don't know if he made contact. But he left me a message earlier today. I haven't had a chance to call him back, so I don't know. Hopefully next month I'll have an update on that. But he's an older gentleman who likes to walk his dog and complaining of the people not following the leash rules. So we are trying to remind people and enforce that a little bit more over there. Anybody have any? What was that?
What was the park?
Bob Baskin,
That's good.
off of like Okie and Rancho, Okie and Valley. He was complaining with the new remodel, it looks so nice that he wants to enjoy it more, but he's afraid that his dog's gonna get attacked, so. I told him we would do our best to address it. I didn't catch, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. I know I have an email from him saying that he left me a message to call him back, so, like I said, hopefully next time are you Ward 1, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully when I get back, I'll be able to contact him and I'll have something more substantive next week on that. Yes, sir.
Larry Schultz, Ward 6. So for Ward 6, I see you have here one unlawful, unspecified activity for an arrest. Is that something that's confidential, or can you share the nature of that unlawful event?
Let me find it real quick, sir.
Or do you know?
Unlawful acts, that's usually, if, I don't know the specific details of this one, but unlawful acts to me,
Okay.
typically with that charge would be unlawful acts related to human excrement. So, maybe I'd have to look into it, but typically that's what that charge would be, off the top of my head.
If you don't know, it's okay.
Yeah,
just
I don't know
curious.
the specific details of that, but I could try to find out for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Don't we have bags in the park?
bags in the park? For the doggy bags or the human bags?
Leave that in there.
So, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions for the officer?
Actually, officer, I have a question. I know like months ago when marijuana was legalized, you know, the commission had a lot of concern about an uptick in people smoking at the park. Is that seemed to have been evened out now, and
Well,
is there still kind of a little bit of an increase because people aren't aware?
There is that increase. I would say it's more juvenile related though, as opposed to adults.
Mhm.
But it's legal to possess, but it's not legal to smoke in public.
Right.
Mostly that's a problem for us on Fremont Street. We seem to have a lot of people thinking that they're here, they could buy it, and they could just smoke it wherever they want. And on Fremont Street, that's something that we deal with more than in the parks themselves. But mostly in the parks, it's other narcotics that we've seen, more hardcore narcotics like meth, heroin, things like that.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? for the Marshal? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your report. Moving on to item number 6, report by Southern Nevada Water Authority represents on water conservation efforts. Representatives.
Hey, I have a presentation. That's the clicker. I don't know where the best place for me to sit or stand is, so if you guys have a preference, let me know. But
Maybe-
otherwise, you want me to sit over here?
Does she need to hit a mic?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you're right there. You're good. There's a mic right there.
Okay. So, hi, thank you for having me here today. My name's Colby Pellegrino, and I'm the Director of Water Resources for the Southern Nevada Water Authority. First, I just want to say thank you for having me here today. I'm going to provide an update on our water resources. But I also want to thank you all for participating in our conservation programs. That's a big portion of what we're going to present on today. The city has always been a good partner. They've done over 85 individual incentive projects with the Southern Nevada Water Authority, including converting almost 1 million acre-feet of turf in parks, which are a huge benefit to our conservation programs. So with that, just a little bit of overview for those of you who don't know who we are. The Southern Nevada Water Authority is a regional agency responsible for water planning at the wholesale level, essentially. We provide wholesale water to all of the retail water purveyors. With that comes other responsibilities, including implementing uniform conservation programs, doing our forward-looking water supply planning, managing water quality and treatment, building the infrastructure we need to deliver all of that water to the valley, and environmental stewardship, particularly as it relates to the Colorado River. Whoops, skipped the slide. So just another reminder, 7 out of every 10 Nevadans rely on water that comes from the Southern Nevada Water Authority. This clicker is fast. Our water resources, when we look statewide, 73% of the state's population lives within our service area. 76% of the state's economic output comes from our service area, and we use less than 5% of the water that's available within Nevada for use. So we have a huge impact on the economy and a fairly small impact on the state's water resources. But this community is nearly fully reliant on the Colorado River. We get over 90% of our supply in any given year from the Colorado River. And the Colorado River is experiencing extreme drought. Since 2000, the Colorado River has been in a drought status. The current drought is the most severe drought in both length and duration in the recorded history that goes back to 1905. So by all accounts, what we're seeing over these last 19 years is incredibly severe, particularly compared to what the folks that divided up the river thought we had to begin with. I think I skipped one again. So Lake Mead's elevations along with that are declining. Lake Mead is one of the 2 major storage reservoirs on the river. Through this drought, we've seen several good years, but a lot of bad years. And you can see that there was a bump there in 2011. When we had a really good snowpack that year, we got a little bit of extra water out from Lake Powell upstream. But other than that, Lake Mead's elevations are declining and have been doing so since the late 90s. This is a projection as we look into the future. And what you can see where the dashed lines pick up are projections for what will happen over the next 2 years. The lightest color blue line is what we call the most probable projection. That's lining up pretty well with the maximum probable that was projected 2 months earlier. And that's because we've had a really good snowpack year. But should we continue to see drought conditions, what's represented in the red there is a probable minimum elevation, we call it. So as you can see, when we cross this threshold for Tier 1 shortage, that is the first time ever we will have a declared shortage on the Colorado River. There's about a 50% chance that occurs next year. That increases to over 80% a year in the 5-year time frame looking forward. If we go down to Tier 2 shortage, that just means additional shortage reductions in our allocation of water from the Colorado River. So what happens if we go even, I think I skipped one more. Nope, that time it was right. So what happens if we go below 1,000? So we show that those projections within the next 2 years get us below 1050. There is a sizable risk of us falling below elevation 1,000 by 2025. So there's a couple things. Number one, Lake Mead has less than 17% of its capacity, which doesn't sound like a lot. That's 4.5 million acre-feet of water. An acre-feet, that's the water wonk talk for how we measure water use. It's 325,000 gallons. It's essentially if you took an acre of land and put a foot of water on top of it, that's what an acre-foot is. But out of Lake Mead every year goes 10 million acre-feet of water just to supply Arizona, California, and Mexico. So we don't have enough water in Lake Mead at that point to meet 1 year's demand of all the downstream users on the river. In addition, our community will lose access to 2 of our 3 intakes in Lake Mead because they will be out of the water. Again, with that low lake elevation, there's a limited ability to meet downstream demands. and hydropower from the dam is significantly reduced. So our agency has been forward-looking at this for quite a long time, and we've been using 4 major initiatives to protect our water supplies. Water banking, which is us taking our unused water or the unused water of other states and storing it for our future benefit. Resource planning. Every year, our agency takes a 50-year look ahead at what our water demands are and what options we have for meeting those water demands, providing insurance that the community can continue to grow and thrive on a reliable and sustainable water supply. The next is infrastructure. Again, putting the pipes in that actually get that water from the lake to the customer, and conservation, which is a huge component of our resource planning that we'll get to as we move through this presentation. It's actually showing up better over there because it's not cutting it off, but you're not struggling to see. It's over here. So what we have here is just a snapshot of what we have banked, what we have stored for our future use. So in 2018, this community used 244,000 acre-feet of water off the Colorado River. What's stacked up there in the right is all of the water that we have stored in various places for our future use. It amounts to about 8 years annual use at our current use. So we have a very robust safety net for transition, for if we run short on the Colorado River, but also for transitioning to whatever resources we might need in the future. Shifting over to infrastructure, in 2005, planning was started to improve our infrastructure related to declining lake levels. We talked about their 3 intakes. This is just a cartoon of how our infrastructure sits within the lake. This next slide shows it a little bit better. So intake number 3, which is down here at the bottom, was the project that we took on in 2005. Essentially, at that time, it was taken on to provide us with better quality water. This was an $800 million project that was funded entirely by our ratepayers. So every person that lives in the valley, you're helping pay for this. But it also gets us lower down in the lake. That's where we get the cooler water, and that's also where we have protection against the declining lake elevations. Coupled with that, I'm sorry, I thought there was another slide in there. We have also put in a pump station associated with that. It's currently in progress. It will be done around 2021. And this intake is essentially the straw that opened to let the water in that low, but these existing pump stations are commensurate with the elevation that they're at. So if Lake Mead were to drop below elevation 1,000 today, we wouldn't have the ability to physically pump water despite our intake being lower. So that pump station is in progress. It's a $600 million project, again, funded entirely by our ratepayers, which will be completed by 2021. So on the Colorado River, we are working to shore up our supply. Basically in water management, you manage your water supply and you manage your water demand. And showing the pictures of what the drought looks like. Any of you who've seen the bathtub ring at Lake Mead, or were here back in the early 80s or late 90s when it was nearly full, have a very good understanding of how much water has been lost. We are partnering with the other states on the Colorado River to implement a drought contingency plan. It's designed to reduce the risk of Lake Mead dropping to those really serious critical elevations where we don't have enough water to deliver downstream or things like that. It includes California participating in shortages for the first time. They currently don't contribute when those shortage triggers are hit. And it also includes some additional incentives for all of the water users to leave their water in Lake Mead. The current structure that's set up actually encourages folks to take extra water that they have stored in Lake Mead out as we approach shortage. And this is designed to remove some of those perverse disincentives to keeping the reservoir level up. So what you see here in this graphic, I was a modeler before I was a manager, so I can't do a presentation without a graph, is our risk of falling below elevation 1020. So what you see in the orange here is this climbing risk. of the lake level going down, approaching nearly 50% in 2026. What you see in the blue is what that risk portfolio looks like once we implement the drought contingency plan. So it doesn't completely remove our risk, but it takes a significant step towards reducing the risk of the Colorado River supply getting into really dire conditions. So if this is implemented, Nevada has to give up some additional water to Lake Mead. We are already giving up at this 1025 level under our existing guidelines 20,000 acre feet of water. This bumps that to 30,000 acre feet of water. Our allocation is 300,000. We're allowed to consume 270. The good news is, because of all of the great conservation our community has done, our current use is 244. So despite us taking reductions in the amount of water that we are allowed to withdraw off the river, we aren't withdrawing the maximum amount anyways. So practically speaking, there's not an impact to this community in the short term of hitting these shortage triggers. So now I'm going to shift and we're going to start talking a little bit about water conservation, and that's where the rest of this will round out. One of the things that's fundamental to understanding the conservation programs that we create is our return flow credit system. It's unique to the Las Vegas Valley and quite frankly, the majority of large metropolitan water users. And because of where the valley is located in our proximity to Lake Mead, we draw water from Lake Mead at the bottom there. We treat it. That water goes outdoor use or indoor use, and because of the age of our community, the amount of centralized sewer, anything that hits a sewer is getting treated and returned back to Lake Mead. For every gallon of water that we return back to Lake Mead, we can take a gallon more out. So we are only charged for our net use, not our gross use from the lake. So we focus almost exclusively our conservation programs on outdoor water use, because that's what has a water resource impact on our water resource footprint for the community. Like I said, that's pretty unique. There is no other metropolitan water user on the Colorado River that has that, and there's very few, quite frankly, throughout the United States that do. So they have other reasons. For example, Southern California is discharging a lot of their water into the ocean. So putting in low flush toilets, doing the indoor type conservation matters a lot more than it does here, and that's why we continue to focus our efforts outdoors. So our flagship program is the Water Smart Landscape Program. I mentioned at the beginning that the city has been a huge participant in this, including the parks. We have removed enough grass to cover over 3,200 football fields. My favorite statistic is we are 96% of the way around the earth. I think this is actually an old one because I thought we were as high as 98. But over 188 million square feet of turf has been removed through this program. So in looking at conservation, there's a couple of ways we measure this. One is how much of the resource are we consuming directly, and the other is our per capita water use. As you all know, the valley is growing. It's going to continue to grow, so we monitor both of those metrics. So if we look back to 2002, we see a great story here. Southern Nevada's population has grown by 43%, but our per capita water use is down 36%, and our Colorado River water use is down 26%. So these two reflections and the difference we see here is essentially that this community, through conservation, has been able to decouple our water use from our economic growth, which is a great story and one that we need to see continue into the future. But if we look at the last 2 or 3 years, this data here is through 2017. We haven't quite kicked out our 2018 data. We see that our population is up 5%, but our per capita water use is up 2%, and our Colorado River consumption is up 8%. So despite having a great long-term trend, we've sort of lost the community somewhere in the last 2 to 3 years on our conservation method, ethics, our need to conserve, and we're actually seeing use go in the wrong direction. There's some reasons for that. Economic growth is a huge one. We've got more building going on, more construction. warmer and drier climate. This year has actually been the first below average year consistently temperature-wise for a decade. But last year, we were experiencing in the summer temperatures that were 7 degrees above average for the entire month, which has a huge impact on the amount of water used outdoors for cooling, that sort of thing. Drought fatigue. Anybody have kids in high school or just graduated high school? So if your child went into school and graduated this year, the Colorado River has been in a drought their entire life. And quite frankly, the community has gotten sick of hearing the message for 18 years that we're in a drought. So we have to find a way to sort of remind people, quit tuning us out. It's still there, it's still serious, we still need to respond. And that goes right along with the complacency. And quite frankly, we have some to own up there on being less effective in conservation. The way we connect with people has changed drastically since our program was implemented. The traditional channels of advertising that worked in the beginning years of our program don't work now. We're having to find ways to reconnect with our customers through social media and other avenues that we didn't need early in the program. So we're working on all of those. And this is just a snapshot of some of the things that we've been doing. 200 million properties contacted through direct mail or e-newsletters throughout the valley. We have social media that is constantly going on, and we actually have good coordination with all of our member agencies, including the city, to get those messages out there. We're putting in bill inserts and again doing advertising, and we're about to roll out a new ad campaign in the summer of this year to remind folks to change their watering clocks. Everyone has a watering clock. A lot of people don't remember to change them. And that's one thing that we're really trying to remind folks, that your plants don't need the same amount of water in January that they do in August. So our focus has been on unused turf outside of that. So what do we consider unused turf? In its most simple term, if the only person walking on that grass is the person with a lawnmower, that is unused turf, non-functional turf. We are not anti-turf. We are anti-non-functional turf. And I want to make that very clear. We've done a turf assessment. We've taken GIS data across the entire valley. We're able to identify places where there are turf and are not turf. We want homes to have turf. We want schools to have turf. We want there to be turf in parks. But in doing all of that, we've identified that in the valley there's roughly 12,000 acres of turf left, and approximately 5,000 of that is what we consider to be non-functional. And the largest opportunities within that non-functional turf are actually outside of the single-family residential. A lot of folks think this is that we need to get people to remove their front lawn that they're not using or things like that, which is helpful, but how many people have driven by a business park that has a strip of grass out front on their daily commute? Nobody is using that grass. Don't see very many people sitting on it in the business centers. There's nobody walking their dog there. Some of the most offensive are the turf that we find in roundabouts. I don't know how many of you drive through Summerlin, but they have the most egregious examples of turf in a roundabout. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not sending my 6- and 8-year-old to go play Frisbee in a roundabout, nor am I walking my dogs there. And that's the type of thing that we're really looking to get out of the community. So again, that water savings associated with removing that non-functional turf is 12.2 billion gallons per year. So it's a very significant amount of water if we are able to continue to control how we water outside. So our board has taken some aggressive actions recently to help spur the conservation program in the valley. I've listed just a few of those here. We increased our rebate in the summer of last year from $2 a square foot to $3 a square foot. For large properties, which would be parks and things like that, that $2 a square foot used to only carry you to 5,000 square feet, and then it was a lower rebate. We've extended that to 10,000 square feet. So you get $3 a square foot for the first 10,000 square feet. You convert, and then you get $1.50 thereafter. So pretty big incentives out there to do this kind of work. We've also made some tweaks that are designed specifically for parks, but one of those is increasing the rebate ceiling on the program to 500,000. That'll help us get bigger projects. We got a lot of feedback that people weren't wanting to dice up projects into several parts in order to get the maximum rebate each year. We've also done some water waste enforcement increases valley-wide. We had a very robust water waste enforcement program pre-recession for various reasons, which anybody who was here through the recession could appreciate. We backed off on fining people during the recession. This community was hurting enough, our water use was low, and we were backing away from being heavy-handed. And we're seeing that we need to go back there. We're seeing a very low level of compliance with our rules that are in place for changing your irrigation clock, watering the right time of day, and those are the things we're trying to correct. Another thing we did for our water efficient technology program, this is sort of a, for the non-residential sector, catch-all for anything that saves water. And if we can quantify it, there's a savings, it's gonna be present for a certain period of years, we provide a rebate for that. One thing that's done traditionally through this is artificial turf. And our board said we're gonna waive that rebate ceiling in order to do pilot programs with schools and parks, where they would otherwise be constrained or might not have the fiscal resources of other areas of the valley to complete these sorts of programs. Lastly, we're working with municipal agencies to increase the protections we have in the code to prevent non-functional turf from being installed. I mentioned Summerlin and the roundabouts before. You would think that some of that turf has been there from before our rules went into place in 2004. In reality, some of it was installed 2 years ago because people are under old development agreements or things like that. The other thing that we find is people will put in a 10-foot strip of turf at the beginning of the neighborhood and call that their neighborhood park. Again, if that's by the entrance of the community where all the traffic is coming in and out, I don't think anyone is sending their kid there to play, particularly in a narrow field. So that's one other thing that we're working on. So this is part of what went to our board for our thinking on parks, and that is, we know we have a lot of older parks out there. We know our older parks tend to have less amenities than some of our newer parks. And they also have some wasteful turf. In some cases, we're not anti-turf in parks. But when we see turf that's in places where nobody is going to use it, such as right up next to the parking lot, that's a place where there's a good opportunity for a border landscape or something like that. And I'm just gonna flash over. You guys are much more familiar with us, but these newer parks, we see that. We see border landscaping. We tend to see a little bit more amenities. So that action that our board took about pilot programs with parks and schools was not intended to just say you have to take turf out and re-landscape. We said if you want to put in a basketball court, a racquetball court, a volleyball court, if you want to put in a splash pad, believe it or not, a splash pad has a smaller water footprint than having turf there. And those are the things that we're willing to partner on and take on some of the cost burden because there's a water savings associated with them. So I mentioned this already, but working with the city and county planning staff to amend the code, that is ongoing. We're trying to prohibit turf at the entrances of neighborhoods in very narrow strips where it serves no functional purpose. Trying to get turf inclusions that are turf excluded and more low maintenance intensity things in areas that are high traffic. So for example, let's get things in medians that don't require the poor landscaper to go across 3 lanes of traffic with a lawnmower and lift it up over a fence to do his job. That's not safe and it's not being used. and also trying to work to figure out the best way to get through these old development agreements. In some cases, we have communities that want to take out turf, and they're being hindered by an old development agreement that says they have to have turf that predated our conservation programs. So those are the things we're working on right now in code. But this is sort of the take-home. We know that our conservation programs reduce water use. And what's there in the blue is our Colorado River consumptive use of water, and what's in the green is our population growth. And it becomes very apparent that we are able to grow our population and use less water. That's what we want to continue doing. So these last 3 slides are from our long-term planning document, our 50-year water resource plan. I know this has been a long presentation, so I'm going to try and go quickly. But this red line here is what we call our demand line. So we take a population projection from the Center for Business and Economic Research at UNLV. We multiply it by a per capita water use, and we come up with that line. Then we fill in underneath it with the resources we have available to us today. Those are permanent resources. In green is temporary resources. That's that stored water that I showed you in the bar chart, the 8-year supply. And then on other slides, excuse me, you'll see future resources. The wind is getting my allergies, and then talking is amplifying it. Thank you. So what is baked into this line, which you don't see, is a conservation goal. This line that we construct for our future demand includes us reducing water use year over year. And that's already within our projection of how we meet demands. So this scenario right here is one that assumes we have a 20,000 acre foot a year shortage on the Colorado River every single year. And you can see that our resources are going to last us a very long time, and we don't need to bring on any new resources should this be our normal into the future. But we amp it up a little and we say, okay, what if we have to increase shortages even more? What if the drought gets worse? What does that look like? And that's where you see these future resources pull in. Those are things like needing to do desalination, our very controversial and expensive groundwater project, things like that. We still have the ability to meet these demands, but at a higher cost. And then what we do here is we show how water conservation plays a role. So if you look at this gray line, that's the line that was in the previous chart. And that shows that our existing conservation goals, which are 116 gallons per capita per day by 2035, right now we're using 127, and 111 by 2055. If we make a modest increase, if we go to 108 gallon per capita per day and 102, that line moves down and the need for all those future resources pushes out. So conservation really is the cheapest alternative for this community being sustainable. And that's why we continue to focus on it. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Larry Schultz, Ward 6. So just a couple quick things. What is your staff in your agency? How many heads do you have?
At the Southern Nevada Water Authority,
Yes.
or total?
Just Southern Nevada.
Okay. I'm gonna quote this and I can get back to you on more succinct numbers. The
Just
Las Vegas,
approximate, it doesn't have to be exact.
yeah, the Las Vegas Valley Water District, which is the largest retailer, and they provide all of the retail water service to the city of Las Vegas, and the Southern Nevada Water Authority share a common staff.
Okay,
That is over 1,200 people.
okay, so it's a common staff.
Yeah.
You don't have dedicated staff.
We do not, every person at the Water Authority gets a check that says Las Vegas Valley Water
Ah,
District.
okay.
We bill our time to the district. I believe it works out to about 500 full-time equivalents, we call it. But again, if you want hard numbers, I'd be
No.
happy to provide
No,
those
no,
too.
that's fine, I just wanted a rough idea. And in terms of funding, because you have all these, you have all the entities, the municipalities, including the city of Las Vegas. Is the funding coming through the Las Vegas Valley Water District, or is it coming from the entities?
Our funding comes in several different places. So what we recoup is from the entities is what we call a wholesale delivery charge. So for the city of Las Vegas customers, the Las Vegas Valley Water District pays us a wholesale fee for the water that we deliver to them. There are some additional charges on the bill that you'll see. If you look at your bill, there's a reliability charge, for example. That comes straight to us.
It's coming from the different municipal water agencies.
Yes.
Okay.
We also get quarter-cent sales tax revenue. So the quarter-cent sales tax revenue comes in and goes
So
to certain
one
projects.
more than one request. So federal government, you know, obviously the states all have part of this, but is the federal government generally supportive, or are they more of a hindrance in terms of these efforts?
To do the Colorado River work,
The efforts to conserve and all that.
they tend to be very supportive. We get federal grants every year for our Water Smart Landscape Conversion Program. We've been very successful in securing those grants to help. But in general, I think the folks that we deal with are typically within the Secretary of Interior's office, the Bureau of Reclamation. And I think they're on the forefront of what's coming with a hotter and drier future and extended drought. And I can stand up here and truthfully tell you, we are ahead of the game of any other city in the western United States as far as water conservation.
I've always sensed that. And just last request, this presentation was very informative and very helpful. At least I have a better understanding now of the bigger picture. Is it possible for us commissioners to have a copy of this provided to our staff members? Okay, I just got an
Yeah,
answer.
and we do have a few written copies, and I know they also have
Okay.
hard copies and.
Or just
digital copies.
electronically is fine, in the PowerPoint. Good. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Commissioner?
Mike Henley, Ward 2. I got in the valley in about 2002, 2003. I think when the initial drought contingency plan was first kicked in, and there was a lot of attention paid to golf courses. I mean, I think if I recall, some of them were being fined. What's the position with SNWA now and as far as golf course?
It's a great question. So, again, I'll tout the city here. The city's responsible for over 3 million, close to 4 million square feet of golf course turf removal. Effectively, our program has helped reduce the area of turf on a golf course by 1 acre per hole. And we've removed enough turf, essentially, that we could create, I'm gonna look at Patrick here, because he's our program manager for this area, 9 new golf courses wholly out of the turf that we've removed. Each golf course is on a water budget, which limits them essentially to using less water, and they are fined if they exceed their water budget.
Okay, another question. Who sets the water rate the city pays?
That the city pays for their metered use
Right.
or for their customers.
Well, where I'm going with this is in other communities that I've lived in, municipal services had a different rate than commercial residential use.
Yes. Yes, so for the city, all of the city properties are served by the Las Vegas Valley Water District. So the Las Vegas Valley Water District, in their service rules is where you would be able to identify which each different class of customer is charged.
So, is Jerry here?
Yeah. I don't know that we get a special rate, and it's also tiered based on consumption. I don't think there's, are there any use hours where it goes up? I don't know. Maybe.
No, we do not have a time of day surcharge rate.
Thank you.
Commissioner Becker, Ward 2, just as a point of interest too, is most of the golf courses though, isn't that non-potable water that can't be recycled or used, or how is that working with the
There
valley?
are some golf courses that are on non-potable water,
Uh-huh.
but there's a lot that are on potable water.
Oh,
Truthfully, it does not have an impact, positive or negative, on our water resource portfolio, whether they're using potable or non-potable water.
okay.
Because that non-potable water, were it not being applied to a golf course, as a secondary reuse, would be retreated and returned to Lake Mead.
Got it.
So from a resource perspective, it doesn't really make a difference whether it's potable or not.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner?
Commissioner Howard. So on these water banks that you were talking about, what's to stop those other states from just taking possession of that water?
So a huge litany of federal law is essentially what's there. We have agreements with the entity that we bank with the state that they're in. So there's a level of entity-to-entity cooperation, state-to-state cooperation, and then within the lower basin of the Colorado River where all of those reside, the Bureau of Reclamation serves as the water master for the lower Colorado River. They essentially get control over what water gets diverted or kept or where it goes and how it goes. And we have an agreement that includes all of those parties and the Bureau of Reclamation, where the Bureau of Reclamation says if you don't live up to your bargain, I am going to shut you off and allow this agreement to be what was contemplated. So that's where we get the assurances. The casual quip that we use is we would rather be upstream with a pump than downstream with a promise. So we're able, we have the protection of being upstream on the river to be able to recover that water anyways.
Okay, and then my second question is on those rebates, do the ratepayers pay for those? Is that just like one of those little line items on our
It is
bill?
all of our conservation programs are within our budget. Yep.
Thank you.
It might have been earlier in your slide, Jerry Walker. You had it on one of your other slideshow presentations. What's the average use per square foot or annual?
It is between 73 and 75 gallons of water per square foot
Per year.
per year.
75 gallons per year per square foot.
Yeah. So if you look at that square foot of turf and imagine an aquarium 10 feet high sitting on top of it, that's how much water each square foot of turf is using in a year.
All right, go ahead, Commissioner.
Is the allocation of water, is it done on a per acre feet or a percentage?
For the
For-
states,
For the states.
it is on a per acre foot basis.
So it's very easy to go over, use more than what the input is. Rather than- If it was just percentage, it would be.
For our return flow credits, is that what
No,
you're?
no, I'm thinking the demand on the Colorado River is always more than what the Colorado River can provide, right?
Yes, so when the compact was divided and created in 1922, in looking back, that was one of the wettest periods on record. And they anticipated that the flow of the river would be about 18 million acre feet. And they divided that up into providing apportions for 16.5 million between the US users and Mexico. Today's flow is looking more like 14.8 million acre feet. So there's a deficit there that has to be overcome. But this current drought is in the 13 millions. So we're on the dry end of what everyone anticipated there would be available.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Presentation is highly appreciated. Now we'll move on to item number 7, Jerry Walker, Operations and Maintenance Director, regarding park maintenance and improvements all wards. So, can't try to sneak out of here.
I'm just looking for a microphone.
Wherever you want it.
Good to see you. Jerry Walker, Director of Operations and Maintenance for the City of Las Vegas. Real quickly, I will mention that the stuff in Summerlin, none of that's city. It is associated with development requirements, but it's all HOA maintained. And so we would not keep any of what you saw on that slide. But I do strongly believe in what the Water Authority's trying to do. We have some other maintenance issues coming forward with Howard Hughes and the Summerlin HOA. And if there's any way I can include in the pending agreement text which will facilitate their turf reductions, we'll do so. We'll also, as part of our process, look at turf reduction options, and I have some queued up. Being a somewhat greedy fellow, we'll target the 3,000 or the 10,000 square feet, which gets the $3 per square foot reimbursement, and then go past that. But there's no reason we're not dropping 10,000 square feet every year. And thank you for funding that for us, Commissioner. So we'll target that. I do have our, what I've discussed with you last time, our presentation for service reductions. That has been rejected in its entirety, and instead I put together a presentation on service modifications and efficiency improvements, which is remarkably similar. That will not be given to council until next week, and so at this point in time I can't pass it out. I gave you pretty much the details last time. And so my recommendation would be that once it's passed out at council, unless there are serious objections or problems, we can ask Kelly to forward it to everybody, and then we can discuss it at the next meeting. I do have a few other updates I'll go through now. We did have a meeting with our Public Works, city marshals, city attorneys, Parks and Rec, and O&M recently regarding park security issues. And we are reviewing how to address concerns with the trails and lodging therein. They're very problematic at a few locations, and I think we've got a consensus that we can enforce no lodging on the trails as a recreational component, and we will pursue that option. There are also some considerations on children's play areas. And before, I think we've taken the primary path of creating children's parks, but we do have on our standard sign, and we can enforce children only in children's play areas such as the splash pads. And so we'll pursue that option also. The splash pads in particular are disconcerting in some of the activities that go there, and then children come in and play in them. We will take a look at Mayfair, late April, and review either with Councilman Coffin, or if at that time there's a new council person seated with that individual, options for Mayfair to address the growing problems we've got there, and that will likely involve some consideration of a children's park in a portion of the park. But our problems are growing there and do need to be addressed. For projects, we're currently on a tree planting project at Rainbow Family Park. We're putting in about 115 trees at this time. There are approximately 200 trees dead or missing. Those are going in right now basically as 24-inch boxes with a few 36s. We hate putting the smaller trees in, and we have initiated a nursery program at our West Service Center, and we'll likely extend that to our East Service Center with treated water in the next year or so. And so we're going to start growing our own trees so that we can plant something caliper similar to a 48-inch box. Right now, we just can't afford the tenfold increase in cost. But we are going ahead. Rainbow is needed, the tree activities, and we're going ahead with that. We've got a bid out for the walking path at Rainbow, and we may put some possible amenities in there, and so that should follow in the next few months. The playground at Betty Wilson on the west side, and for those of you that don't know, was vandalized and burnt down last fall. We first pursued an insurance claim on the basis of the cost of the, or the age of the component, and then the asset value relative to our deductible. It was deemed that we had no value to pursue the claim, and so there'll be no insurance money. But nonetheless, the structure itself, the playground structure, has to be replaced along with the shade fabric and the surfacing, and that will all is in process. I signed the purchase requisition today for the playground equipment. We are missing a 2 to 5 playground at Bunker, and the 5 to 12 is very aged. And so we will be moving forward with replacement on those with some Ward 4 specific funding. We finished the fence at the children's playground, or the children's park. And so at Huntridge, we fenced in the children's park. And the reason we fenced it in is to give it a sense of demarcation on the boundaries. And so if we don't secure the children's park, then it's difficult for the city marshals to enforce the access requirements into the park. And so if it's an unsecured area, then people will still congregate there and engage in illicit activities, and then if there's no perimeter boundary, they can just walk off when they see the marshal pull up. And so by fencing it, we provided for that when it is put back into place to be enforced as a children's park area. And I'm not sure if it's been mentioned yet, but there is a development proposal with the developer at that location. They're looking at improvements to the park, and so an MOU has been signed. For those not aware, the park will stay closed for another 6 months, and that includes the children's park, which was subdivided off of it. I will post new signage within the next week or so. Historical components at Floyd Lamb Park, with that being the bridge and the water wheel, are being reconstructed at this point in time, and so it was just wood rot. They had fallen into disrepair. Rabbit activities didn't help, but we're fixing those. And we're also then have sealed up all of the burrows underneath the tower because we were concerned about the structural components related to the tower. We have also working with the rabbit advocacy groups, and they are capturing rabbits. We are providing for the compensation for the spay and neutering. For those of you not aware, we caught about 30 or 40 through our own efforts earlier in the fall. They've caught another 25 or 30 so, and we're working with them on rehoming and temporary placement of the rabbits. We did open a rabbitat at the Area 5 of the park, which was not well received, and so we're working with them on the rehoming. And the last thing I've got is we've got some OT spring cleaning projects, and so with our service reductions, or our staffing reductions, that provides then a budget surplus in this year. And although we don't intend to go wild and just spend it because it's there, we will be doing a series of overtime projects, basically weeding, trash collection, shrubbery, trimming, and that sort of routine activity over the next several weeks to try and get the parks, which have kind of fallen into bad shape, back up to our standards.
Thank you very much for your report. Seeing how we're running out of time, or running through time, we'll go to item number 8, report by commission members regarding parks issues and events within their respective council wards and at large. Is there anyone who would like to give a report on? Go ahead, Commissioner.
I just wanted to let everyone know that there was a very interesting interview with the developer on NPR's State of Nevada. I think it was yesterday. That was very, very informative. So I don't know if you're interested in listening to it, but I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Commissioner Becker, Ward 2, just a couple quick things to call out. I know in Ward 4, they're gonna have a movie at Gearheim Park on May 17th. So I might go to that one. So if you all are interested, you might see me there. That's at Fort Apache and Alexander, so you can take the drive out. And then, I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think summer camp, we have to say this, right? Summer camp registration opens today. Summer's right around the corner, so it opened today. I mean, that shows you how close it is, so definitely keep that in mind. Thank you.
Commissioner?
Henley, Ward 2. This isn't specific to Ward 2, but it is specific to the city. On March 12th, Congress reauthorized the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This is huge. It's been in existence for about 50 years. It lost its funding and authorization back in 2015. And the source of funds is not tax dollars. What the government does is take a percentage off of offshore oil and gas royalty, and it equated to about $1 billion a year that's distributed through federal agencies, and the state and local component for grants is substantial. I think since the program's existence, there's been over 41,000 urban and municipal projects done with it. It's a great source of funds, and they reauthorized it in perpetuity. So it should go into effect in the next budget cycle for the federal government. So that'll give the city another source of funds for capital projects.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there anyone else? Commissioner?
Okay, I just want to say thank you to Director Jerry Walker about the tour, park tour, the one-way tour, and it was very helpful. And I don't know if you guys want to do that, you want to schedule with him, that would be really very helpful. And I just want to say thank you.
Jerry Walker, thank you, and we're available for any of the commissioners and/or the respective council offices to tour the parks, look at your concerns at a mutually convenient time.
Thank you. They've been doing that tour for some time now, so that's great that we can still be invited and still appreciate going to see the parks as guided by the directors. If there are no other comments, we'll move on to item number 9, report by Maggie Plaster, Parks and Recreation Acting Director, regarding upcoming Department of Parks and Recreation activities.
Thank you. Maggie Plaster with Parks and Recreation. I just have 2 short items. One, thank you Commissioner Becker for the summer camp plug. We do have a teen camp. So if you have any teenagers that you know of who need something to do this summer, it's a pretty new program. I think it might be our 3rd or 4th year, but we take them on field trips Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday all throughout the valley. And sometimes we expose them to things that they haven't seen before, like Lake Mead, or doing a cruise down the river, or axe throwing at Axe Monkey. So we try to do some really neat things with them and keep them entertained throughout the summer. And then also, as you probably know, today's primary election day. The seats that are up are mayor, wards 1, 3, and 5, and then there'll be a special election for Ward 2 that'll be with the general election. If you haven't voted yet, you can vote where we normally have our meetings. That's why we're not there today. And just to remind you that your appointment is not coterminous with your council member. So you have a 3-year term, and it's dependent on your reappointment date. So it has nothing to do with who your council member is for the ward you represent.
Okay, thank you for your report about axe throwing. We'll move
It's
on to-
really fun if you need to get some aggression out.
Yes, I guess so.
And it's very safe.
All right.
That's from experience.
We'll move on to the item number 10, citizens' participation. Public comments during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the commission. No subject may be acted upon by the commission unless the subject is on the agenda and it is scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, come forward to give your name for the record. The amount of discussion on any single subject, as well as any amount of time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited. Is there anyone here for the citizens' participation? Okay, no one here.